All right, it's time for another episode of the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, and here we discuss all things astrology and what to do with it. You know, being aware and awake is just the first step. It's what you do with it that matters. And just like when we first wake up and have our first cup of steaming hot Joe, doesn't mean much until we actually start doing something with our day. So too, we need to learn what we can do with the rising cosmic tide. And this week, it's just tsunami-like in the energy because we have the new moon on Wednesday. The new moon is on Wednesday, October 6th, at least on the west coast of the United States, but it pretty much is almost everywhere because it happens so early in the morning on the west coast at about 4-something a.m. It might be Thursday in Australia. But yeah, it is, you want to calculate based off of my time, because I use Pacific time, -7 GMT right now, because we're still in daylight savings time. As soon as it gets over to standard, we'll be -8. So, knowing your time zones is important if you're an astrologer. Just that's for my students. If you just want to know what the hell is going on, then listen up. We're going to be talking about that here on the Awake Space podcast. We're going to talk about this incredible week and this incredible month. I've got some new stuff to talk about in regards to that, but I also have some fun stuff to share about what's coming up with it as well. So we're going to talk about the outer planets and tertiary planets that are stationing direct in October, as well as Mercury, and what that means for you. What does this direct station mean for you? That and more is in this episode. So I've said pretty much all I can say about this new moon coming up on the 6th. The new moon conjunct Mars happens just hours before Pluto stations direct. And then we have Venus ingressing into Sagittarius. Normally I'd be excited because that means she's going to conjunct my Mars in my natal chart. Right away in my progress chart, she conjuncts later in her transit. That's kind of some fun, juicy stuff for me personally. For you guys, what does it mean? For you guys, it means that we need to pay attention to global finance. As a political analyst, like let's put astrology aside for a little bit, but as a political analyst, looking at the spin on the current state of the world economics is pretty funny to me. There's a lot of articles going out saying, you know, those real estate problems that the Chinese companies are having, they're not going to affect us like Lehman Brothers. And there's so many articles coming out in Forbes, Business Insider, you know, all of the money publications that I'm like, wow, she doth protest too much. You just trying to talk us out of this situation or what? Because global trade has got problems. The supply chain has got problems. And starting Wednesday, October 6th, we're going to see more evidence of that because that new moon is conjunct Mars in Libra. And Libra is all about logistics. And it's going to be pretty funny. And as I talked about at Living with Luna today, and Cosmic Surfers, which are my Patreon tiers where we go through a little more advanced astrology, I was reminding people, Libra doesn't bring balance. Libra strikes balance. It gains balance, which means often Libra energy is unbalanced. So we're going to see where things are not fair and not balanced and aren't working very well come that new moon conjunct Mars. And then Mars and the moon are square Pluto. And I've been talking about this. Now, if you're a patron, that gets my forecasts, you got a little announcement that the workshop is up on Vimeo, and you can rent it for 24 hours for $12, or you can just rent it forever for $59. You can do that on my website as well. If you just go to the link in this bio, you can find that blog post. It's just $59 straight up on the blog post. But if you want to rent it, I'll put the link to the Vimeo on demand, and you can watch the 2-hour episode for $12. But you only get it for 24 hours. There's a lot of information in there on how to prepare for the end of the year. It's not just about October. It's October, November, December, into January, February, and we even talk a little about what's going to go on in April. I'll be doing some more workshops, so don't worry. I'm not going to leave you hanging for 2022. So we've got the 6. That's just a hell of a lot of energy. Then we've got Venus in Sagittarius. That's global economics. That's global politics. And finance, because it's Venus. We're going to see a lot of stuff going on around that. And then, if you ever saw Dude, Where's My Car? And then, we've got Saturn stationing direct on the 8th. And I'm going to kind of dedicate this podcast to that Saturn station. Anytime a planet stations, it is intense energy. Anytime a planet stations, it is intense energy. We've got the moon, or not the moon, we've got Saturn stationing direct on the 8th. Now, I told you guys in the summer, especially in June, that thing that was making you tired wasn't Mercury retrograde. It was Saturn retrograde. It was holding us back. It was having us think. It was having us recalibrate, because there was a lot of work to do when we go forward. Saturn's about discipline. Mars is about action. Okay? Mars is about action. Saturn's about discipline. And in Aquarius, it's about society. It's about the internet. It's about not really communication, but community. It's about the people. Astrology. Anything to do with humanity. Believe it or not, Aquarius is not about aliens. It's really about humanity. The water bearer is a human being carrying a jug of water. It's carrying life to the people, giving life to the people. Everybody needs clean water. By the way, Enbridge is going to be able to get Line 3 going. They start operations this week. Please contact your representatives and the president and remind them that this is a fool's errand. It has the potential to pollute the entire Mississippi River watershed. Like, are you kidding me that we're allowing something like that to happen? It makes no sense, not even for greed, because at the end of the day, the economic repercussions are massive. Like, let's take away all of the humanitarianism stuff and doing right by treaty lands. Take that to the side. The economic impact for polluting that watershed is ungodly high. So argue however you want to argue with your politicians. Usually they want to hear about the bottom line. They couldn't give a rat's outs about human dignity or rights. Show them where they're going to lose money. That's been my experience. Because they don't care otherwise in general. Those who do care, we know they care. We want to work on the ones who are supporting something that is just inanely stupid from any perspective. So we've got that happening. The water bearer carries life. The water bearer carries life. It carries water. Water is life. Point blank. Pretty simple. It's not hard to understand. So we got Saturn stationing direct. That's a lot of energy. And it's really this week that we see the labor movement really start taking off. There's going to be some pushback as corporations continue to cry poor and that they can't find workers, even though we know they're purposely not hiring people. There's plenty of people who are willing to work. They just don't want to work for shitty wages and conditions. If you want to follow someone kind of fun, follow Dan Price on social media. He is a CEO who lowered his salary to $70,000 a year and raised the minimum pay in his company to $70,000 a year. Did that about 5-6 years ago. And he took a lot of heat for it, but his company grew exponentially. Because, you know, if you pay people, they're like, oh, hey, I'll stick around. I'll work. This is making it worth it. It's, you know, much more fulfilling when you're not starving to death or working so hard you don't get to have a life. Oddly enough, wanting quality of life seems to be a very subversive thing, which is kind of funny. It's funny to me, anyway. I've always been about that quality of life, so it's nice to see other people join me in it. Quality of life is important, and it's not always about the money, but having enough money to do what you want to do is really, really important. And so unpacking our cultural and social beliefs around it, and I'm not talking about prosperity gospel, I'm talking about understanding that there are more ways to make money now, today, than there ever have been, and you don't have to have a ton of overhead to get started. That's something I learned on my own and something I teach to others and have for the last 10 years because the internet allows us a lot of opportunity, but the big mistake people make is they get into products. And right now, it's really a bad time to do product because shipping is going to be bad. The U.S. Post Office is slowing down delivery. We're going to have all kinds of transportation delays anyway. Mercury is retrograde and square Pluto right now. So just our entire supply chain is really under strain. But there's lots of ways we can have information products. There's a lot of things you know or do that you take for granted and you think it's just common sense, and it's not. It's a talent that you have. And we'll do an astrology class on that, on how to look for your talents that you take for granted. I think you guys would enjoy that. I'm looking forward to Pluto and Saturn stationing direct because there's more energy going forward. And it really, I've been talking about that rubber band getting pulled back and then snapping. Well, it's snapping big time this week with Pluto station direct, Saturn station direct. We're going to see a lot of political stuff. We're going to see a lot of crazy weather, possible seismic activity, possible volcanic activity. This week in particular is a very volatile week. We're going to be kind of like dealing with all of that energy as we go through the next week. You know, we'll just be like, kind of adjusting into this reality of crazy supply chain, crazy weather, crazy political activity. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see pushback from some unbalanced people when it comes to women's issues. Things are going to get more tense. No, I don't see a war coming in the United States. I think there's going to be people who try to provoke one, but I don't think it's actually going to work. I've just seen too much evidence that we're not going there. You know, people have not kind of taken the bait, which is good. Yay for education and an educated population. But it's still a lot of energy, and there's going to be plenty of enough stuff going on. Like I said, volatile weather, volatile political stuff, especially around economics. Economics is really going to be highlighted as we go through this month. Supply chain, again, big time. I've been warning you guys for months and months and months, not just on the podcast, but on TikTok and my patrons. I feel really secure that I've gotten you guys really ready. I feel really good knowing that there are at least a couple hundred people in the world who are really ready for what's about to hit the fan. I'd love to have reached more, but it's okay. Make sure you share this stuff with your friends. If you have friends who might like this podcast, feel free to share it. Don't keep me a secret, because my goal is to help people navigate the cosmic tide. And then we move to the 18th. The 18th is when Jupiter and Mercury both station direct. That is a lot of energy. It's also when the U.S. runs out of money. It's when the U.S. runs out of money. So, let's take a look. What time does Jupiter station direct? Oh, it looks like it's stationing direct on the 17th. But I don't know what time. Let me take a look. Bear with me while I look this up on my own ephemeris, because you never know when I look up other people's stuff. I believe it's... So it does station on the 17th. It's direct on the 18th. It's late on the 17th. After hours on the 17th when it comes to Congress. Yeah. So the 18th, it'll be direct. And I believe they'll pass raising the debt ceiling. I don't think they're going to let the debt ceiling not be met. I just don't think so. I think some of it's political theater, and I think they're trying to stop other political agenda. But on the 18th is when Mercury stations. And honestly, it stations, it looks like, in the morning. So I think we'll have a resolution on the debt ceiling. Yeah, it stations early in the morning. So it's still a lot of energy. There'll be a lot of debate. But Mars is trine Jupiter that day on the 18th. That's a pretty good day. I don't think we're going to have problems that day. There's a lot of other stuff happening this month. I mean, we've got the full moon in Aries, and I'll talk to you more about that as we go along, because that's the 20th. I kind of want you guys to keep your focus on the new moon right now, and this week where Pluto and Saturn are stationing, because when a planet stations, it's a lot of energy. So just know that. Oh, come on. I'm looking for it. No, I don't see it. But again, I go through all of this in the workshop on how to prepare for it. And you can catch that in the link in the description. Like I said, you can rent it for like 24 hours. It's a 2-hour seminar. is worth listening to. It's a little late to get ready in some ways, but not in others. If you need to get those extra groceries, go do it. Do try to get yourself ready for winter, because it's going to be east of the Rockies. That's the whole of the east of the Rockies, east of the Rocky Mountains. In the United States, the weather is going to be very, very inclement. It's going to be very rocky weather. It's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. It's going to be windy. There's a whole lot of crap coming up. And you want to be ready and prepared for power outages, down trees, flooding, snow, ice. Just depends on where you're at. Yes, even you, Florida, it's going to be freaking cold for you. It's all about relativity. It's going to be wet. So there's a lot of stuff coming, and you want to be ready for it. On top of that, we do have COVID. Now, if you remember, other astrologers were like, we're going to be in lockdowns in October or November. And I kept saying, I don't see a COVID lockdown. I just don't. I don't see a COVID lockdown this winter. I do see weather. I do see transportation issues. I see infrastructure issues. I don't see COVID. It's just not showing up in the charts. But I do see there is an expansion of COVID that will become much more visible after Jupiter enters Pisces again, and that's in December. We also have the final Saturn-Uranus square coming up in December, which is December 24th. And again, I'll talk about that more. I talk about that in the workshop for certain. This is not going to be your favorite Christmas Eve. It's going to be somewhat dramatic. It's going to be contentious. It depends on what's happening in your own personal chart. Highly suggest you do not do travel for Christmas Eve this year. Okay? I think between the weather and, again, logistics, it's just going to be difficult. And also COVID. We are not out of the pandemic yet. We are not out of it. Just because you're tired of it doesn't mean it's over. You want to make sure you're vaccinated, and you want to make sure you're wearing masks. Okay? I know it's now become a political thing. You can't tell me what to do. But yeah, actually, we can tell people what to do. Wear your freaking shoes or you don't get to go into a restaurant. It is exactly the same thing. Why? Because your feet are dirty. Guess what? Your germs come out of your mouth and your nose. I watched somebody do something like super stupid yesterday at the grocery store. This girl who had been bagging my groceries had to cough. So she turned around and she took off her mask in order to cough. Like, the whole reason you wear the mask is to protect everybody from your cough. Like, how does that make sense? Make that make sense to me, please. I just kind of gave her this, like, are you shitting me look as I walked away. I'm sure she thought I was being a rude customer. But seriously, do not take your mask off to sneeze or cough. The whole freaking point is to keep that to yourself. There's no reason not to wear it. My asthmatic daughter with eczema wears a mask, even though it irritates her skin. You can too. Okay? That's just the whole freaking point. We're all vaccinated. It hasn't done a damn thing to my psychic abilities, for all of you worried about that crap. That's a bunch of bullshit. It hasn't changed my spiritual nature. Oh, wait, I just said bullshit. Am I spiritual? Yep, I am. Hasn't changed my attitude either. I got called a sheep about this a couple months back, and I just went, bah, look at me, bah, I'm a sheep. Ah. I don't care what I get called. We've got some really heavy times coming up, and some of them are related to COVID. So just do your due diligence, okay? That's what I have to say. Don't make me play Saturn to you. Saturn is about consequences. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment. So let's talk about consequences and Saturn. So I know everybody likes to say Saturn is the Lord of Karma. Hear me, fear me. It's kind of a misunderstanding of what karma is. From a higher metaphysical perspective, it's consequence. Okay? If you're in a shitty mood and you're grouchy and you're up in your head, the odds of doing something klutzy and clumsy are higher than if you are present and paying attention. If you're paying attention, the odds of being klutzy and clumsy are drastically changed. I know this because I prove it to myself all the time. Yesterday, I was in a crunchy, grouchy mood because the moon and Saturn were square and it was aspecting my progressed Venus in my 8th house. And nothing went right. Like nothing went right. I even spilled my Taco Bell onto my brand new passenger seat of my brand new car. Luckily, it was easily cleaned. But come on. It was if I was in a decent mood, it wouldn't have mattered. I'm not going to say it wouldn't have happened, but it wouldn't have mattered as much. And I would have been like, oh, well, oopsie, let's clean it. Given the mood I was in, it just continued a cascade of unfortunate events. None of which were earth-shattering or difficult, but they certainly didn't make the day go better. And I wasn't really in a frame of mind to be creative and make TikToks, which impacts everything else I do. So, consequences. And Saturn, it's a thing. It's a thing. If all you do is sit around daydreaming and you never take any action, nothing ever happens. That's a consequence. Likewise, if you're working all the time and you never take any time off and you burn out, that's a consequence. If you do your due diligence and you prepare and you're mostly ready for an event or a time period or a situation and you're able to get through it easier, that too is a consequence. Welcome to Saturn energy. Now, Saturn and I are pretty good buddies. I actually like Saturn. Saturn sits unaspected in my astrological chart. Yep, it does. Saturn is just kind of sitting in that 6th house running the show. Do I work too hard sometimes? Yup. Do I feel it when I don't? Yup. When I don't take time off? Oh my God. And I didn't do that for a couple of weeks because I was really trying to get everybody ready. And so now my Mondays, they're pretty sacred for the next little bit. That time off is sacred because it is a recharging time. Otherwise, I'm going to get sick because Saturn sits in my 6th house. If I overwork, I burn out, I will get sick. That's what's going to happen to stop me from moving. And that's a consequence. Likewise, if you're ambitious, which is Saturn also, it shows your ambition, and you take action towards your ambitions, the consequence is meaningful success at some point if you have that described. If you don't have meaningful success and you're just operating off of everybody else's idea of success, there's consequences to that too. There's consequences to freaking everything. Whether they're pleasant or unpleasant depends. Okay? And what most people don't do is understand their agency and how much power they have over those consequences. Okay? If you're driving 50 miles over the speed limit, the consequences is you get pulled over. Okay? Now, due to social cultural bias, we have consequences that aren't fair. And that happens when Saturn is poorly aspected by transit too. So you want to look for those things. Not every consequence is the direct result of us doing something deliberately or non-thinkingly. Right? Sometimes we have consequences that come at us because of society. Thus, we're looking at Saturn in Aquarius, and we're looking at consequences on society. Right now, we're looking at a society that is consumerist, meeting its consequences with a shitty supply chain. A supply chain that was vulnerable to start with, but people didn't want to talk about that. So now here we are. And we'll see it more and more evidenced. Now, you may claim you're not a consumer type person, but there's still stuff you like to get, like food, like clothes. You may not be a clothes florist, you may not be a designer, but you still may want to get other things. You might want to buy presents for people. That may not go so well. Shop early if those things are important to you. I'd say go with gift cards for the rest of it. Send money. That kind of thing. Gifts of food will be really popular this year, or tangible, like physical, like practical objects will be popular this year. So there's that. Don't worry, I'm going to make a gift-giving guide really, really soon on the way you most thoughtfully give gifts to people, depending on their Venus. That'll be soon. I think you'll like that. It's kind of fun. So we've got that going for us. Consequences are a thing, guys. We're all facing collective consequences. And we're facing societal consequences. Authority figures are going to be facing some consequences. Because the people are gathering their authority. And people will find they have a lot more authority when Saturn stations direct. We're going to see the labor movement gather steam. We're going to see the people fighting for equity across the board. Lots of issues. And authority figures are going to be held pretty responsible across the board. It doesn't matter if it's local or corporate or anybody who holds a seat of authority will be held to account by the people. And that's an important thing. So remember, there's this thing called consequence. Don't worry about it on your end. Just know there's good consequences and there's less favorable ones. So, everybody's worried about being punished because you're all trained that you're going to be punished some way. It's just do your best. And doing your best brings you better consequences in general, except for the societal ones. Those ones, we're all going to take a little bit of a hit in some way, expect to be frustrated when it comes to the supply chain, and have some patience. That will do you better than anything else. All right, we're going to be up for Patreon shout-outs. Thank you to all of my patrons. We're going to get to that next. All right. It's now October 6th. I recorded the first part of this podcast on October 3rd, before the new moon and Pluto stationing direct. I want to thank all of my patrons. All of your support is amazing. Big shout outs to our new patrons. We've got, let's take a look here. We've got the Magical Misanthropy. We've got Denise Knapp, Michael Joshua, Jen, Susan, Alyssa, Aaron, It's Grace, L'Oreal, Jacqueline, Rosalie, Jordan, Courtney, Alexis, Susie, Laura, Catherine, Andrea, Luis Sandoval, Eli, or Ellie, Kayla, Rebecca, Scarlett, Cynthia, Stacy, Kimberly, Kara, or Cara, Alexandra, Jacqueline, Megan, Kim Ivy, RBF Champion, and Shelley. Big thank you to all of you. We've had an active Discord in the last couple of days as everybody was getting ready for the new moon and talking about all the stuff going on. We got PB and Jelly time. We've got Magic. She's back from her retreat. We've got Shanette with Shane. Nicole Cormier, also known as the Numerology Lady, a really good friend of mine. EMP ZDZ. Let's see. Shaded JLo. Dusty 1917. These guys are all really, really active on the server. Dwabit, of course. And if you haven't followed Dwabit on TikTok, you need to do that. Rita VSE. RIT VSE. Very active. A very good astrology student. Mick Dubs, as always. Chris, who is absolute. Can't do anything without Chris. She's one of my mods, and she's also my handy dandy second pair of hands. She sends out all those recording links from readings. So huge thanks to her. Kathy, also known as Sister Luck, is an amazing member of the Discord and a moderator. Reach out and say hi to Kathy. She's a beautiful Libra soul with a great sense of humor. Medium Carrie Wilson is tossing some image out there in the comedy thread, making us all laugh. And then we also have Casey Felton Louie, who is helping me get my writing done, and she's also a moderator on Discord. Takes a team, folks. It takes a team, and you're part of my team, and I want to give you my forever thank you. Now, remember, as a patron, you get a 20% off discount. You get a 20% off discount on all of my classes and readings. So if you haven't used that discount, make sure you're reading your emails. It's in there. Okay. That's where I give those 2.5 day forecasts. That's for Astro Adventurers and up. Where I give your rising sign horoscopes and the 411, or the info, that dates me, doesn't it? The 411, where I give all the information of the upcoming lunar transits. We're still with the moon in Libra. It ingresses into Scorpio tomorrow, and you can look forward to those forecasts as well. So in the next segment, we're going to talk a little more about Saturn and Saturn returns. And there's a reason for that, because, well, you'll find out. Well, tonight, October 6th, I did a 2-hour TikTok live stream. I knew I felt tired at the end of it. And I'm like, hey, I think I've talked for a long time. 2 hours. That Venus in Gemini, she was a-going. And we talked all about Saturn and Saturn returns. You can catch that up on YouTube for the replay. I gave a lot of really important information. One of the commenters was like, whoa, you pay a lot of money for this information. Well, I just gave you the tip of the iceberg in that replay. And what I am going to do is on Halloween, because it was requested by my patrons, I'm going to be teaching 2 workshops on Saturn. 2 workshops. The first is Saturn through the houses, so you can understand Saturn in the signs and houses and how it expresses in a natal chart. And then the second workshop of that day, which is a 90-minute workshop, is Saturn returns. Understanding what Saturn returns are. In fact, you get more than one. I explain that in the live stream, and I'll talk a little bit about that here. And kind of what a Saturn return actually is, which it's actually a divination chart. Gives you a bird's eye view of what the next 28.5 years will look like, what the themes are. Most of all, what you know is that there is a process of getting to the Saturn return. And that's what I kind of want to talk about now. Because there's a lot of kind of psychobabble, pseudo-pop, psychology, astrology out there about the Saturn return. So first of all, Saturn in a birth chart versus a transit. Okay. So Saturn in a birth chart represents where you have been restricted or repressed by authority figures. It shows the more authoritarian parent in our modern society. Yes, it does represent also the father classically, but sometimes mom is the Saturn and dad is the moon. Yep, depends on who the more nurturing parent is, and it depends on who the more authoritarian parent was. And both play a role in the natal chart when you're reading it as a professional astrologer. I'm not going to explain all the ins and outs of it here. I do that when I'm mentoring professional astrologers, people who have their basics down, who want to practice astrology and do so ethically and accurately. And my God, we need more out there. Because I can tell you, there's a lot of Hellenist stuff out there. And I think it's a great study if you want to understand the history of astrology. But trying to apply Hellenistic methods and interpretations in the modern world does not serve us. In fact, it will knock our credibility. It does not increase our credibility. Because it's not applying logic. Okay? And I've held that view since Project Hindsight started. I come from cultural anthropology. I don't care how good you are at translating ancient Greece. You don't live then. Okay? Culture is fluid. We do not have anywhere close to anything that resembles the culture of ancient Greece active in our lives today. There's some hangovers, and some of those hangovers are actually being dismantled today. And we are the people dismantling those hangovers. Where the hell do you think we get patriarchy from? Come on, people. It comes from Chaldea. But anyway, I digress. Saturn. Yes, it is about restriction. It can show where you've been controlled and restricted, but it also shows your discipline, your ambition, right? It shows where you restrict yourself due to the way you internalize the restrictions by society, culture, and your family. And it can show how you can apply those lessons, not all of them pleasant, into your current adult life. Okay? So you can harness Saturn. You can flip it on its ear and use that same energy to help reach meaningful success. But you have to do a lot of unpacking to get there. And that's part of what the Saturn return is for, the process of the return. And the process of the return is all about looking at what you want to take as your base and your foundation into the world as a full-fledged adult. Do you hear that owl? We got a good old hoot owl hooting with us tonight. So you wouldn't have probably lived, if you were working class, you probably wouldn't have lived to 30. You would have been lucky to get there. The Saturn return happens between 27 and 29 years old. It's because Saturn has a 28.5-year orbit. Until the 1800s, humans didn't often live past 30. And if they made it to 30, they were considered a pretty wise being. Our lifespans have expanded greatly on average. Okay? Once you got into the 1800s, the average lifespan, moved up to the 40s. Okay? So if you made it to the second Saturn return at around 56, you were a right old wise person. Okay? You were an elder. And you had station and standing in the community. And if you made it past that to your third, which is in your 80s, right? Then, and you're around your Uranus return at 84, well, my goodness, you were revered and you held a lot of power, even though you were frail and elderly and needed to have care, but you had wisdom beyond anyone else in your area. Well, we live differently now, and we actually live longer than our ancestors did. In fact, the first woman on my mom's side of the family to make it past 40 was her sister. Yeah. And she managed to make it almost to her Uranus return, which was unthinkable. Their mother died at 36. She made it to her first Saturn return. She was the first person on her mom's side to make it past the Saturn return at all. Her mother died at 28, probably during the Saturn return. And her mother died at 21. Didn't even make it there. They were all poor. They were uneducated. They had no choices in how they procreated. And they had a lot of kids, not enough nourishment, and they died. And that is one of the reasons, in historical terms, Saturn was viewed as a malefic, because there were very dire consequences to being human in a physical reality. We still have our traumas, but I think, if we went back 100 years and people heard our trauma stories, they'd be like, and? That's a normal day. Wow. You got enough to eat? So things change, and our consciousness changes, and our reality changes, and our reality is shaped based off our perceptions. We live longer. And so the first Saturn return doesn't give us a whole lot of societal meaning, but we still have a lot of pressure to have accomplishments by 30. And that pressure to have accomplishments by 30 is because historically, not many of us made it past 30. We don't have a rush anymore. You don't have to have it all figured out by 30 if you're younger than 30. And if you're over 30 and you don't have it figured out, guess what? You don't have to either. But you do have to understand consequence. And when we allow our fear to rule us, when we allow our past to rule us, then we limit our agency. If we want to hand our authority over to a spouse of any kind, or a partner, or a boss, we limit our power and our agency. By not having good boundaries, we limit our agency. We give ourselves away. It used to really kind of bug me when I was married. I would go to make arrangements for something with some friends, and they'd be like, oh, I need to ask my husband. And I'm like, are you just trying to get out of it or what? Because I didn't think about asking my husband for permission to do things. Unless I didn't want to do it. If I didn't want to do it, then I'd be like, oh, I need to ask my husband. But I didn't mean it. That was just my way of saying I didn't want to do it without being rude. But I noticed some people really did have to ask. And I thought, what the hell? We live in the 21st century. I was in my second marriage at the time. It was after the year 2001. We're in the 21st century. Why the hell are you having to ask if you can go to coffee? That's not okay. And then if he said no, well, then it was all his fault that they didn't have a social life. I'm like, I'd be looking for a new husband, or I'd be looking to go single. Because I can tell you, the minute mine started pulling that shit, I got a divorce. Because nobody owns you. You don't own anybody else. We don't control each other. What is this? We're in mutuality. That's what partnership is about. It is not about ownership. Okay? And neither should a husband have to ask a wife if they can go do something. If it's a budgetary thing that affects both of you, 8th house, then yes, have the mutual discussion. But by God, really? That asking permission thing. Because then when things go tits up, guess who you get to blame? That other person. That other person. We hand our power away because then we don't have to be responsible. Well, they said no, now I don't get to do this thing I dreamed of, because if I did what I dreamed of doing and I failed, and I didn't get to do it that way, it'd be all my fault. So it's easier to say somebody else didn't let me do it. And I'm not judging you when I say this. I've actually done that, especially when I was younger. And until I could own up to it, I couldn't liberate myself from that habit. Remember from earlier in this podcast, Saturn sits in my 6th house unaspected. It runs amok in my chart. Saturn shows where we hand over our authority and how we can take it back. Did I say it was easy? No. But the Saturn return is a time where we learn what our authority can be and is, and where we hand it away because we're afraid. We're afraid of the consequences of success, of meeting our ambitions. We're afraid of the responsibility. Because we've been trained to be afraid of responsibility. Work for somebody else. It's safer than they take the risk. Except it's not safer. It hasn't been safer. It's never been safer. Never has been. You might have a good employer, and then it's worth the risk offset. But how many employers are that good to you? And if you have a good employer, oh my God, congratulations, that's amazing. Some places are getting with it. Most places aren't getting with it. Most places aren't getting with it. So understanding the power of Saturn in your chart, in your natal chart, understanding the process of the Saturn return, even if you've already gone through it, can help you step into your own authority, because it's not as scary once you get used to it. The difference between the people who have full agency over their life and the ones that don't is the ones that don't, when they make a mistake, they go, okay, moving on. You know, and sometimes that means they face some pretty serious consequences. Mark Zuckerberg's about to face a whole hell of a lot next year and the year after. It's my prediction that Facebook goes down in 2023. And I made that prediction in September of 2020 to a friend, a fellow astrologer. And I looked at the 2012 natal chart from the IPO of Facebook and said, ooh, I bet they'd get sued out of business and broken up. I put that prediction in the Discord if you want to go look. It's in the Laurie predictions thread. I was very excited to be able to find it. I had to scour a very active messenger thread. I'm like, I know I predicted this in 2020. Here it comes a consequence. Oh, Zucky. Oh, Zucky, that's what you get. But yeah. So, Saturn is about consequence. It's about authority. And as far as karma goes, on one hand, the popular belief about karma, it isn't wrong entirely, but it certainly doesn't serve us to think in those terms. If you want to live at the mercy of the universe handing out punishment, it will oblige you. It will. It will oblige you. And if you want to live at your own agency and your own authority, the universe will also oblige you. Doesn't mean you're consequence free. You can't go around hitting people and not expect to get hit back. Okay? And likewise, if you're always nice, and you do for everybody else, you never ask for anything, guess what? You're not going to get anything either. All right? Just being good, towing the line, doesn't necessarily reap any rewards, but due diligence and putting in the effort, the right kind of effort, will reap you the best rewards. Understanding what your ambitions are for. If you're living for somebody else's approval, well, your achievements won't be as meaningful, whereas if you're doing it for yourself and you know what success means to you, then those will be meaningful successes. Most of this is pretty simple stuff. It's less easy to do than it is to say, and it does take work. Oh, wait, Saturn. But it's worth it. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it isn't worth it. There's no add water and just have instant anything except coffee. Maybe iced tea or lemonade. It comes in powder form. But most things don't. And Saturn gives you the reward for effort. Saturn was a harvest god. Saturn ruled seeds and the sowing of them and the harvesting of them. Believe it or not, in ancient Rome. In Greece, it was Kronos. And Kronos ruled time. Saturn is about schedules and deadlines. Saturn is about discipline and ambition and reaping the rewards of your efforts. Reaping what you sow in positive and negative terms, based on your perceptions, based on your efforts. If all you do is think about stuff and you never take any action, nothing ever happens. That's a consequence. Talked about that in the consequences section of this podcast. So I'm looking out towards my second Saturn return. It's not for a couple years yet. No. It's when Saturn goes into Taurus. And I'll be probably having to take on more responsibility or restructure what I do. You know, I know how I gave up my authority in my first Saturn return. On one hand, I gained it. And on another hand, in a very mundane, everyday life way, I handed it over. So I both gained authority in one area of life, and I gave it away in another because I was scared and I was tired. And I didn't believe enough in myself to own my own agency. And I rectified it. If I hadn't rectified it by the second Saturn return, I might not have made it through the second Saturn return physically, because the stress was killing me. And I could blame the other person all I wanted, but I handed it over. And so I took it back. While Saturn was crossing my ascendant. And I just had the Saturn opposition last year, where I took on more responsibility and owned more of my life and took on more of my agency in ways I'd never allowed myself to do before. At 51 years old. Well, 51. Yeah, that was pretty exciting. So, the Saturn cycles are so important, and understanding the Saturn return process is important because you're not totally stuck with what you do at the Saturn return itself. And you can watch the whole 2-hour live stream to learn more about the process and understand that Saturn returns are a divination chart showing a general theme of 28 and a half years. And I'll explain how to find that, how to make that. You have to play with time. You have to play around. Most softwares don't really make up a Saturn return because it wasn't popular to do divination astrology. I was very fortunate to study under some very old astrologers when I was young. Some of my teachers and mentors were in their 80s and 90s, and they were online. I don't ever want to hear about old people not getting tech. Back in the 90s, I had 80 and 90-year-old astrologers online teaching me stuff. When I was in my 20s, there were plenty of older people who could use tech. And these guys had some really old technique under their belts. And they made sure they passed their knowledge on. And that was pretty damn cool. These guys studied with people like Dane Ruger, who died before I could become an astrologer, but he was an amazing modern mystic. You should look up Dane's stuff. It's deep. It's really deep. If you want to blow your mind, read Dane Ruger. But That's what makes for really good astrologers, people who are willing to dive in deep to the information. Really good stuff. That's also Saturn, willing to do the work, willing to dig in deep, not shying away from the effort. And you can still work smart, not hard. It doesn't have to be hard, but it needs to be diligent and disciplined. You can't just skim things and think you're an expert. It doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. Neither does Saturn. And I look forward to teaching this on Halloween. We're going to dress up in costumes. I'm going to be Ida from the Owl House because all my patrons say that's who I am. And I'm not going to disagree. I don't even watch TV. I don't watch anything. But I went and I watched some on YouTube and I was like, yep, they're right. Yup, that would be me. I did just get some spider earrings that are pretty cool. But anyway. So I hope you sign up for the course. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Remember, if you're a patron, you get a 20% discount on all my courses, etc. All right. And I'll be talking more about Saturn on TikTok. Remember, Saturn goes direct on the 8th. It stations direct on the 8th. And the roller coaster moves even faster. So remember, we're taking a vertical dive through October, in through November, and then we hit the wall on December 24th, 2021, when we have the final Saturn-Uranus square. And I will keep you up to date and prepared about that. If you haven't gone grocery shopping, get your groceries. Do it this week, because things are going to get increasingly more expensive and harder to find. Once again, it's my pleasure to keep you informed and prepared about all things astrology. And thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you next time on the Awake Space Podcast.